The first time I noticed the room, I was convinced it had always been there. After all, the Grand Everglade Hotel was a labyrinth of history, with its grand hallways and opulent furnishings that spoke of a bygone era. It wasn't unusual to come across a space I hadn't seen before, but there was something different about room 617. I arrived at the Grand Everglade for a week-long business trip, hoping the serene ambiance would help me focus on my work. The lobby was bustling when I checked in, the concierge's fingers dancing over the keys of an ancient typewriter. My room, 614, was on the 6th floor. After settling in, I decided to explore the hotel, drawn to its charm and the promise of hidden gems. The hallway on my floor was adorned with rich velvet wallpaper and antique sconces that cast a warm, golden glow. I walked past room 615, then 616, and stopped short when I saw room 617. It was tucked away in a corner, slightly obscured by a large potted fern. I could have sworn I had walked this hallway earlier without seeing it. Curious, I approached the door, reaching out to touch the brass handle. It was cold, and as my fingers brushed against it, a shiver ran down my spine. A maid appeared suddenly, startling me. She was an older woman, her uniform crisp and her expression unreadable. "Excuse me, miss," I said, "can you tell me about this room?" Her eyes flicked to the door, then back to me, and for a moment I thought I saw a flash of fear. "That room is rarely used," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Before I could ask more, she hurried down the hallway, her footsteps echoing long after she had disappeared from sight. That night I couldn't stop thinking about room 617. I tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling that the room was somehow significant. The next morning, after a restless sleep, I decided to investigate further. I headed back to the 6th floor, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and trepidation. To my astonishment, room 617 was gone. The space where it had been was now a blank wall, the potted fern standing guard over nothing. I stared in disbelief, running my hands over the smooth wallpaper. Had I imagined it? Determined to find answers, I approached the front desk. The concierge, a middle-aged man with a kind smile, greeted me warmly. "How can I help you, ma'am?" "I was wondering about room 617, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I saw it yesterday, but today it's not there." The smile faded from his face, replaced by a look of puzzlement. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there is no room 617 in this hotel. Perhaps you were mistaken." Frustration bubbled up inside me. "I know what I saw," I insisted. "It was there." He shook his head slowly. "There's no record of such a room. Perhaps you should take a walk, clear your mind." I left the desk feeling both foolish and more determined than ever. As I wandered the halls, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was being hidden from me. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, dusty room. Stepping inside, I felt a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. The room was small, with a single bed and a dresser covered in a thick layer of dust. On the bed, there was a journal, its leather cover cracked and worn. I picked it up, the pages yellowed with age. The first entry was dated over 50 years ago, and as I began to read, a sense of dread washed over me. The journal belonged to a former guest of the hotel, who had written about a series of gruesome murders that had taken place within its walls. Each entry grew more frantic, detailing the writer's attempts to uncover the truth. The last entry was unfinished, the handwriting shaky and desperate. "The room is the key," it read. "I must find it again before it's too late." Just as I was about to turn the page, I heard a noise behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. The door, however, had closed silently, trapping me inside. My heart raced as I realized I might have just stepped into a nightmare from which there was no escape. The Disappearing Room, Part 2. Panic set in as I pounded on the door, hoping someone would hear me. My fists bruised against the solid wood, but there was no response. The room seemed to absorb the sound, amplifying my fear. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down and think rationally. There had to be a way out. I turned back to the journal, hoping it held some answers. Flipping through the pages, I found more entries detailing the murders. Each victim had stayed in room 617, and their disappearances were never solved. The journal's author believed the room itself was cursed, somehow connected to the gruesome events. The final entries were the most disturbing. The writer had become increasingly paranoid, convinced that they were being watched. They described strange occurrences, flickering lights, whispers in the night, and objects moving on their own. The last entry ended abruptly, mid-sentence, with a blot of ink trailing off the page. I felt a chill as I realized the writer might have met the same fate as the other victims. The room's oppressive atmosphere seemed to close in around me, and I knew I had to get out before it was too late. I searched the room frantically, looking for any clue that might help me escape. In the dim light, I noticed a small keyhole on the dresser. The key was nowhere to be found, but the drawer had a faint outline of a rectangular shape around it. I pulled at the drawer, and with a little effort, it slid open. Inside, I found an old rusted key. My hands shook as I inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a loud click, and the back of the dresser swung open, revealing a hidden passage. Without hesitation, I stepped through, leaving the sinister room behind. The passage was narrow and dark, the air damp and musty. I moved cautiously, feeling my way along the walls. After what felt like an eternity, I emerged into a dimly lit corridor. I recognized it immediately. It was the hallway outside my room. Relief washed over me, and I quickly made my way back to room 614. Once inside, I locked the door and sank to the floor, my heart still racing. The journal was clutched in my hands, its pages filled with the terrifying history of room 617. I knew I couldn't ignore what I had discovered. The murders had never been solved, and the room's dark secrets were still hidden within the hotel's walls. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to stay and investigate further. The hotel staff seemed to be hiding something, and I was determined to find out what. As I sat in my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The Grand Everglade Hotel was filled with secrets, and I was only beginning to uncover its darkest mystery. The Disappearing Room, Part 3. The next day, I woke early, the events of the previous night still fresh in my mind. I decided to take a more systematic approach. I began by speaking with some of the older staff members, hoping they might have heard rumors or stories about room 617. Most of them seemed genuinely confused, but a few exchanged uneasy glances when I mentioned the room. One elderly bellhop, Mr. Thompson, seemed particularly agitated by my questions. "Miss, I don't think it's wise to go poking around where you don't belong," he said, his voice trembling. "That room, it's been trouble for as long as I can remember. Best to leave it be." "But why?" I pressed. He sighed heavily, looking around to ensure we were alone. Back in the 1950s, there were a series of disappearances. Guests would check in, but they never checked out. The police investigated, but they never found anything. The room was sealed off after the last guest vanished, but it seems it never truly went away. His words sent a chill down my spine. "Do you know anything about the murders?" Mr. Thompson shook his head. "Only rumors. Some say the room is cursed, others believe it's haunted. Whatever the case, anyone who stays there is never seen again." I thanked him and retreated to my room, my mind racing with possibilities. I decided to visit the local library, hoping to find newspaper articles or records that might shed light on the disappearances. After hours of searching, I found a series of old newspaper clippings detailing the strange events at the Grand Everglade. Each article told a similar story. A guest checks in, vanishes without a trace, and the room number always mentioned, 617. One article caught my attention. It described the disappearance of a journalist named Emily Carter, who had been investigating the murders. She had written about finding clues and feeling close to solving the mystery, but she vanished before she could publish her findings. Returning to the hotel, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I needed to find Emily's notes. If she had discovered something significant, it might still be hidden within the hotel. I started by searching the library, the hotel's archives, and even the basement, but found nothing. Late that night, as I was preparing to give up for the day, I noticed something strange about the pattern on the wallpaper in the hallway near room 617. There was a slight bulge, almost imperceptible, but enough to pique my curiosity. I pressed against it, and to my surprise, a small panel slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, I found a bundle of papers, yellowed with age. They were Emily Carter's notes. As I read through them, I felt a mix of excitement and fear. Emily had discovered that the room seemed to be a nexus of supernatural energy, a place where the boundaries between our world and another were thin. She believed that the room itself was alive, feeding off the fear and despair of its occupants. Emily had found references to an ancient ritual, a way to cleanse the room and break its curse, but her notes ended abruptly, suggesting she had been taken before she could complete her work. I knew then that I had to finish what she had started. If I could perform the ritual, I might be able to free the spirits trapped within room 617 and end its reign of terror. As I prepared for the task ahead, I couldn't help but feel the weight of those who had come before me. The Grand Everglade Hotel held many secrets, but I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The following night, armed with Emily's notes and a sense of determination, I returned to room 617. The door was there, waiting for me. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, feeling the oppressive atmosphere close in around me once again. Emily's notes described a ritual that required specific items: a candle, a mirror, and a piece of chalk. I had gathered everything earlier that day. Placing the candle in the center of the room, I lit it, the flame flickering weakly against the darkness. I drew a circle around the candle with the chalk, just as Emily had instructed. Finally, I positioned the mirror on the dresser, angled so it reflected the candle's light. The room seemed to grow colder as I began to chant the words Emily had written. The air grew thick and I could feel a presence, watching, waiting. My voice wavered, but I continued, determined to see it through. Suddenly, the candle's flame flickered violently, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The mirror began to fog up and I saw words forming in the condensation. "Leave now." My heart pounded, but I refused to be deterred. I knew that leaving would mean certain death. As I continued the chant, the room seemed to vibrate with energy. The shadows on the walls grew darker, coalescing into human shapes. I realized with a start that they were the spirits of the room's victims, drawn to the ritual. The final words of the chant left my lips and a deafening silence fell over the room. The shadows seemed to freeze, then slowly began to fade. The temperature rose and the oppressive feeling lifted. I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. The mirror cleared, and I saw my reflection looking back at me with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The spirits were gone, freed from their torment. The room was just a room now, stripped of its malevolent energy. I left room 617, closing the door behind me. As I walked down the hallway, I saw Mr. Thompson standing near the elevator. He gave me a knowing nod, a look of gratitude in his eyes. "You did it," he said softly. "You broke the curse." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. The Grand Everglade Hotel would no longer be haunted by the disappearances, and its guests would be safe. As I packed my belongings and prepared to leave the hotel, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. I had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. As I drove away from the Grand Everglade, I glanced back at the imposing building. It looked just as grand and mysterious as ever, but I knew its darkest secret had been laid to rest. The disappearing room would trouble no one ever again, and the spirits of the past could finally find peace.